The most powerful woman in the city hit the marble floor of the most expensive restaurant in town, and not one of her 50 employees moved to catch her. The waiters froze. The manager dropped his tray. Her own assistant just stared at her phone. Only one man stood up. A tired single father in a second-hand jacket, the kind of man the maitre d' had nearly turned away at the door an hour earlier. He crossed that dining room like a soldier crossing open ground, and what he did next would shatter everything Vivian Ashford believed about money power and who you can count on. Drop your city in the comments so I know how far this story has traveled, and subscribe, because the twist is just getting started. Vivian Ashford did not wait for the valet. She came out of the back of the black Suburban before it had fully stopped, one heel hitting the curb, the other already swinging forward, and the young man who'd run around the hood to open her door ended up holding nothing but air and an apology. "Ms. Ashford, I'm sorry, Don't." She didn't look at him. She was looking at her phone, and her thumb was moving fast. "Park it close. I'm not staying late." Behind her, a smaller door opened, and a boy climbed down. 6 years old, dark hair combed flat by somebody who wasn't his mother. A little gray blazer that probably cost more than the valet made in a week. His name was Sam, and right now he was looking up at the front of the restaurant, the gold letters that spelled Belcourt, the men in long coats at the door, the people inside behind glass who all seemed to be eating very slowly and laughing without making any sound, and he was not looking at his mother at all. "Sam?" Vivian was already 6 steps ahead. "Come on." He came. He always came. That was the thing about Sam, that nobody but Vivian seemed to notice that he followed. He followed nannies and drivers and tutors and security men and his mother through 100 buildings a year, and he followed quietly, and somewhere along the way, he had stopped expecting anyone to wait for him. The maitre d' met them at the door. His name was Gerard, and he had been bowing to people like Vivian Ashford for 30 years. "Ms. Ashford, what an honor. Your table is by the window," I called ahead. Of course you did." He turned, gesturing them in, and as he did, his eyes flicked over the boy, then over Vivian's bare ring finger, then back up with a smile so smooth you could have skated on it. "And young Master Sam, we have your booster ready." "He doesn't need a booster," Vivian said. "He's 6, not 4. Of course. They walked in. Heads turned. They always turned. Vivian Ashford was the kind of face that had been on the cover of 3 business magazines that year, the woman who'd taken a dying logistics company and turned it into a $14 billion empire that moved a quarter of the freight on the eastern seaboard. People looked at her the way they looked at weather, like something powerful that had nothing to do with them. She sat. Sam sat. A waiter materialized, poured water, vanished. Vivian put her phone on the table face up where she could see it, and she did not pick up the menu. "What do you want to eat?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "Can I have the chicken nuggets?" "They don't have chicken nuggets." Sam looked at the table. "What do they have?" "They have Sam, I don't know. They have salmon. They have a chicken thing. You'll like the chicken thing." Okay, that was it. That was the whole conversation, and Vivian's phone lit up before her son had finished saying the word, and her attention was gone, pulled down into the screen, into the 11 o'clock board meeting that was now happening at 7 o'clock, because of a man named Howard Pell, who wanted her job and had decided this week was the week to start reaching for it. She typed, "I'm aware of the leak. Sit on the statement. Nobody talks to the press until I'm in that room Monday." Across the dining room, 60 feet away near the back, where the tables were smaller, and the candles were electric instead of real, the front door of Belcourt opened again, and a very different kind of evening walked in. Wade Coleman had checked the address 3 times in the truck. He'd checked it because there was no way, no possible way that the reservation his daughter's school had given him as a prize was at a place like this. Lily had won the district science fair. 2nd grade against 4th and 5th graders with a project about how dogs hear sounds people can't. The prize, the flyer said, was a dinner for the winning family at a local fine dining establishment donated by a generous patron. He'd pictured the steakhouse off the highway. He had not pictured this. He stood in the doorway, in the cleanest shirt he owned, a collared button-down that had been blue once, and was now the color of an old swimming pool, and a brown jacket he'd had since before Lily was born. And he held his 7-year-old daughter's hand, and for one full second, he considered turning around and walking back out. Then Lily looked up at him. She had her mother's eyes. He never told her that because it would make her ask questions, and he didn't have good answers, but she did. She had Sarah's eyes exactly, and right now those eyes were enormous and shining, and they were looking at all the gold and the glass like she'd walked into the inside of a treasure chest. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Is this our dinner?" And that settled it. Because the truth was, Wade Coleman would walk into a building on fire for that kid. A fancy restaurant full of people who'd look at his jacket and do the math that wasn't even in the same county as the things he'd walked into. He squared up the way you square up before you do something hard, and he stepped inside. Gerard was on him before he'd gone 4 feet. "Sir?" The smile was there, but it had changed. It had gone cold around the edges. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, sir. Coleman. Party of 2. Gerard looked at the screen on his little podium. He scrolled. His face did a small, careful thing, a tightening, and Wade saw it, because Wade had spent a long time learning to read faces fast in places where reading a face a half-second slow could cost a man his life. The science fair." Gerard said it the way you'd say the leftovers. "Of course, we do honor those." He looked at Lily and his face warmed by exactly the amount that was polite and not 1 degree more. "Congratulations, young lady." "Thank you," Lily said. "I won. It was about dogs." "How nice." Gerard's eyes came back up to Wade. "If you'll follow me, we have a table in the back." He walked them past the good tables, past the window. Wade noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything that the path Gerard chose took them along the wall away from the center of the room, the way you'd route something you didn't want seen. He didn't say anything. He'd been routed before. They sat at a small table near the kitchen doors, where the candle was a battery, and the noise of the line cooks came through whenever the door swung. Lily climbed into her chair and put both hands flat on the white tablecloth and just felt the smoothness of it, like it was snow. "This is the softest table I ever felt," she said. Wade laughed. It came out of him before he could stop it, low and real, and a couple at the next table glanced over, and Wade didn't care, because that right there, his kid being amazed by a tablecloth that was worth the jacket, worth the looks, worth the 40-minute drive. "Order whatever you want, baby," he said. He'd already looked at the menu in the truck on his phone, and his stomach had gone tight at the numbers, and he'd already decided he wasn't eating. He'd say he wasn't hungry. He'd had a big lunch. He'd order her whatever made her happy, and he'd drink the free water and watch her eat, and it would be the best meal he'd had in a year. Anything. Anything on the kids' page. Lily studied it with the seriousness of a surgeon. "I want the pasta with the butter. And can I have a lemonade? A real one? Not the kind you make." "You can have a real one." She beamed at him like he'd handed her the moon. Sam saw her first. He'd been pushing the chicken thing around his plate. He hadn't liked the chicken thing, and he was bored in the deep, hollow way that a 6-year-old gets bored in a room full of adults who aren't talking to him. And he turned around in his chair to look at the whole restaurant, and 60 feet away he saw a girl his size laughing. Not laughing politely. Not the small, careful laugh his mother's friends did at parties. The girl was laughing so hard she had to put her hand over her mouth, and her dad Sam could see the dad. A big man in a brown jacket was making a face, crossing his eyes or something, and the girl laughed harder, and then the dad laughed too, and the two of them were just sitting there in the back of the restaurant, being so happy that Sam felt it from across the room like heat off a stove. He turned back around. "Mom?" Vivian was typing. "Mom, can I go say hi to that girl?" "What girl?" "That girl, over there, she's laughing." Vivian didn't look up. "Eat your dinner." "I don't like it." "Then sit still." Sam sat still for about 90 seconds. Then he slid down out of his chair. He did it the way kids do things they've decided to do, without announcement, without permission. Just a smooth disappearance from one place, and a determined journey toward another. And he was halfway across the dining room, weaving between the white tables in his little gray blazer, before Vivian Ashford looked up from her phone and realized her son was gone. Sam. She stood. The chair scraped. Sam. He didn't stop. He had a destination. And every head in Belcourt, the magazine readers, the deal-makers, the maitre d'. The waiters turned to watch the most photographed woman in the city stand up in the middle of dinner with naked panic on her face, because for 1 second, one real second, she didn't know where her child was. She found him with her eyes a half-second later. He was at the small table by the kitchen. He was standing in front of the laughing girl, and he was saying something, and Vivian's heart was still going like a hammer as she came across the floor after him. "And I'm 6, Sam was saying. "How old are you?" "7, said Lily. "I won a science fair. Do you like dogs?" "I have a dog." "Well, my mom's friend has a dog. But I get to—" "Sam." Vivian arrived. She put her hand on his shoulder, and she was about to say, "I am so sorry, we'll get out of your way," in the smooth voice she used to end interactions she didn't want, and then she looked up and met the eyes of the man at the table, and something in her stalled. Wade had stood when she approached. Not fast, not nervous, just the way a man stands when a woman comes to his table, an old kind of manners that had gone out of most of the world. He was a head taller than her. There was a scar through one eyebrow, and gray coming in early at his temples, and his hands, she noticed, were rough, in a way that hands in her world were never rough. "Ma'am," he said, "your boy's no trouble. He just came to make a friend." There was no edge in it, no groveling either. He said it the way you'd state a fact about the weather. Vivian opened her mouth to do the smooth thing. "Mom," Sam said, and he turned around and looked up at her, and his face. His face was open. It was open in a way she almost never saw it, because most of the time her son wore the same closed, patient waiting expression he wore in the backs of cars. "Mom, can I sit with Lily? Just for a minute, please." And Vivian Ashford, who had said no to senators, no to billionaires, no to her own board of directors with a cold flat. No. That ended conversations. Vivian Ashford stood there with her hand on her son's shoulder and could not get the word out. Because she was doing math she hadn't meant to do. She was thinking, when was the last time he asked me for something with that face? And the answer she came up with frightened her, so she stopped doing the math. "We don't want to intrude," she said. It wasn't a no. She heard herself, and she was surprised at herself. "It's no intrusion," Wade said. "Plenty of room. Lily, scoot over for your friend." Lily scooted over so fast she nearly fell off her chair. And Sam. Sam climbed into the empty seat beside the laughing girl before his mother could change her mind, and the two of them put their heads together and started talking at the same time, both of them neither listening, both delighted the way only children can be. Vivian stood there. There was no chair for her. Wade pulled out the one across the table. "Ma'am, sit if you like. I'm Wade Coleman." She looked at the chair. She looked at the kitchen door swinging behind him. She was aware sharply, the way she was aware of everything in a room, that people were watching. That phones maybe were already up. That somewhere in this restaurant there was very likely someone who would by tomorrow morning be able to tell Howard Pell that Vivian Ashford had been seen having a breakdown over her kid, and then sitting down at the helps table with some man in a Goodwill jacket. She sat down. She would never for the rest of her life be able to fully explain why. "Vivian," she said. "Ashford." "I know," Wade said. She raised an eyebrow. "My phone showed me a picture of you this morning," he said not unkindly. "Something about a leak. I didn't read it. None of my business." He picked up his water. "Lily, what do you say to your friend's mom?" "Hi," Lily said, not looking up from Sam. "Do you want some of my lemonade when it comes? It's the real kind." Vivian opened her mouth and again found that the thing she was going to say wasn't there. "That's very generous," she managed. "She's a generous kid," Wade said. "Gets it from her." He stopped. just for half a beat. Vivian caught it because Vivian caught everything, but she didn't know yet what it meant. She's just generous, he finished. The waiter who came to the small table was not the waiter who'd been serving it. This one was older, more senior, and Vivian understood at once that he'd been sent that the moment her presence at this table registered the staff had quietly upgraded it. The man bowed slightly to her. "Ms. Ashford, can I bring you anything?" The kitchen would be delighted to. "She's fine," Wade said pleasantly before Vivian could answer. "And I think the kids ordered already. Pasta with butter for the young lady and—" He looked at Sam. "What'll you have, partner, on me?" "It's not on you," Vivian said. "It's a kid's dinner. I think I can swing a kid's dinner." There was something in the way he said it. Light, easy, but with a floor under it, don't a line drawn so gently you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. That made Vivian close her mouth. She was a woman who paid people. She paid everyone. There was no one in her life who would not let her pay. And she sat there absorbing the strange small fact that this man in the swimming pool shirt had just declined her money over a plate of buttered pasta, and had done it with more grace than the men who took her money usually managed. "I want what she's having," Sam said. "The pasta." "2 pastas," Wade told the waiter. "2 real lemonades. And the lady'll have—" He glanced at her. "Nothing," Vivian said. "Water's fine." The waiter left. And then there was a silence, and into the silence, the children poured everything, all the urgent business of 2 kids who'd known each other 90 seconds and intended to know each other forever. "My dog's name is Biscuit, but he's not really my dog. My project was about how dogs hear up to 45,000 hertz and people only hear 20,000. What's a hertz? It's how you measure sound. My mom measures money." That one landed in the quiet between the adults like a dropped glass. Wade didn't laugh. He had the decency not to laugh, and Vivian saw him not laugh, and she was grateful for it in a way that surprised her. Instead, he leaned in toward the kids. "You know what I measure," he said. "What?" said both children. "How long it takes Lily to fall asleep after I start reading. Last night it was about 4 pages. "It was not," Lily said, scandalized. "I heard the whole chapter." "You snored through the dragon part." "I don't snore." "Like a little chainsaw." Sam laughed. He laughed the way the girl had been laughing when Sam first saw her hard, with his hand over his mouth, helplessly. And Vivian watched her son laugh, and felt something move in her chest that she did not have a name for. Or rather, she had a name for it, but the name was so old, she'd stopped using it. When was the last time she'd made him laugh like that? She couldn't remember. That was the honest, terrible answer. She could remember board votes from 4 years ago. She could remember the exact phrasing of a contract she'd signed in 2021. She could not remember the last time she had made her own child laugh until he had to cover his mouth. "You're a teacher," she heard herself ask Wade. "No, ma'am." "You talk to them like a teacher." "I just talk to them," he said. "They're people. People like being talked to like they're people. Even the small ones. Especially the small ones." He took a sip of his water. "What is it you do exactly? I know the name. I don't really know the thing." She was so used to people knowing the thing that the question startled her into a real answer instead of a rehearsed one. "Freight, logistics. We move things. Containers, trucks, ports. If you bought something this week, there's a decent chance my company touched it somewhere between the factory and your door." "Huh," Wade said. He thought about it. "So you're the reason my daughter's birthday present showed up on time in December?" "Probably. Then I owe you a thank you. She wanted this one specific stuffed otter, and the whole internet was sold out, and the one place that had it got it to us in 2 days. Saved my whole Christmas." He raised his water glass an inch a tiny toast. "Thank you." And Vivian Ashford, who had been thanked by governors, who had her name on a hospital wing, who got more gratitude in a week than most people got in a decade, felt that one, felt it square in the chest. Because it was the first thank you she'd gotten in longer than she could remember that wasn't a transaction. Nobody wanted anything from her at this table. The man didn't want a meeting. He didn't want an investment. He wanted to thank her because his little girl got an otter. She didn't know what to do with it, so she looked down at the table. The pastas came. The kids ate. And as they ate, the whispering started. Vivian felt it before she heard it, that prickle on the back of the neck that powerful people develop the awareness of being discussed. She turned her head a half-inch and saw 2 tables over a woman she vaguely recognized, the wife of somebody leaning toward her husband and saying something behind her hand while looking directly at their table. She heard a fragment. "Is that her with?" And then a small disbelieving laugh. And there, just like that, the old machinery in Vivian Ashford's head started up again. The machinery that had run her life for 20 years. The machinery that calculated how things looked. It said, "This is bad. This is a story." Billionaire CEO, fresh off a leak, abandons her son in a restaurant, then sits down with who is he? Anyway, you don't even know who he is. You're 3 feet from a stranger, and the whole room is watching, and there are phones, and Howard Pell would pay real money for this. She started to gather herself to leave. And then Sam beside her said something she hadn't heard him say in months. He said around a mouthful of pasta to Lily, "This is the funnest dinner I ever had." The funnest, not the fanciest. He'd been to dinners that cost more than Wade Coleman made in a month. He'd eaten in 3 countries. He had been, in the literal sense, everywhere, and her son had just announced to a girl he'd known for 10 minutes that the funnest dinner of his entire life was happening right now at the table by the kitchen with the battery candle. Vivian did not get up. She looked at the whispering woman 2 tables over, and she held the woman's eyes until the woman looked away, and then Vivian Ashford did something she would think about for a long time afterward. She picked up her water glass, and she turned back to the table, and she said to Wade Coleman, "You said 4 pages. Ma'am." "The book. Last night. You said she fell asleep after 4 pages. What's the book?" Wade blinked. Then a slow grin came up the side of his face, like he understood exactly what she'd just decided, and exactly what it cost her, and approved of it. "The Hobbit," he said. "We're on our 3rd time through. She likes the dragon." "I do not snore at the dragon," Lily said. "You snore so loud the dragon could hear you, at 45,000 hertz. The kids both lost it, even Vivian, and this was the part she'd remember. Even Vivian Ashford felt the corner of her own mouth move. A thing it did not do in restaurants, a thing it did not do on camera, a thing it had nearly forgotten how to do. "You served," she said suddenly. She didn't know why she knew it. Something about the way he'd stood up, the way he scanned the room, the scar. "You were in the service." The grin came down slow and easy into something quieter. "Navy," he said, "long time ago." "What did you do?" He was quiet for a second. The line cooks banged something behind him. "Kept people alive," he said. "Mostly, when I could." And he didn't say anything else. And Vivian, who interrogated executives for a living, who could pull a confession out of a CFO in under 90 seconds. Vivian knew with absolute certainty that there was a whole continent behind those 4 words, and that she was not getting on the boat tonight. She let it go. That too surprised her. She was not a woman who let things go. Her phone rang. It was on the table face up, and the name that lit the screen was Diane. Diane Royce. Her chief of staff? The only person who had this number and would dare to use it at dinner. And Vivian felt the whole evening lurch. Felt the warm, strange bubble of the back corner table press up against the cold, pressurized hull of her real life. She looked at the phone. She looked at the kids. She looked for some reason at Wade. "You should take it," he said. "If it's ringing through dinner, it matters to somebody." She picked up. "What?" She listened. The color of her face changed, not dramatically. She was too controlled for that. But Wade was watching, and Wade had watched a lot of faces in a lot of bad moments. And he saw the small grayness come into hers. "When?" she said. "Who released it? No, no, you do not respond, Diane." Diane, listen to me. Then they're lying, and we'll prove they're lying Monday. But if we respond tonight, we look like we're scrambling. And scrambling is what they want. That's the whole... She stopped. She pressed two fingers to her temple. The kids had gone quiet across the table, watching her with the wary stillness children get around adult voices that have changed temperature. "I'll call you back," Vivian said, and hung up and set the phone down very carefully, the way you set down something you want to throw. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Wade, in a low voice just for her, "Eat something." She looked at him. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I've been watching. You ordered nothing, and you've had nothing but water and whatever that call just was. It took something out of you, and you've got a long night coming. I can see it on you. So, before you call her back..." He slid the breadbasket the senior waiter had left untouched across the white tablecloth toward her. "Eat something. 2 minutes. The world'll hold." It was such a small thing. A breadbasket slid 6 inches across a table. There were men who paid her court with yachts. There were men who'd offered her the kind of money that bent governments. And Vivian Ashford sat in the back corner of Belcourt, with her empire shaking under her, and her son laughing beside her, and a stranger's daughter offering to share a real lemonade. And she looked at the breadbasket, and her eyes, her hard, famous, weatherproof eyes, stung just slightly, just for a second. She took a piece of bread. "There you go," Wade said like it was nothing, and turned back to the kids. "Now, Lily, tell your friend the part about how dogs can smell time." "Dogs can smell time," Sam said. "They can smell time," Lily said with the total authority of a 7-year-old scientist. "It's because smells get weaker, so when a smell is really faint, a dog knows a lot of time went by, and when it's strong, it knows you just left. That's how they know when you're coming home." "That's not real." "It's real. It was in my project." "Daddy, is that real?" "It's real," Wade said. She didn't make it up. Dogs live in a world of smells the way we live in a world of light. They smell the morning and the afternoon as different colors almost. They smell who came through a room and how long ago. He said it the way some men talk about the things they love, the small true facts of the world. They smell when their person is close, even before they hear the truck. And Vivian, chewing her bread, watched this man, this medic, this single father, this stranger in a faded shirt, hold 2 children spellbound about dogs and time. And she thought a thought that did not fit anywhere in her life. A thought that had no slot in the architecture of her days. She thought, "My son has every system money can build. Tutors, schedules, security, specialists, a staff of people whose entire job is him. And he has never once in his whole life been talked to like this." She set the thought down carefully, the way she'd set down the phone. She wasn't ready to look at it. But she didn't throw it away either. She filed it somewhere she'd have to come back to, and she ate another piece of bread, and across the table her son laughed again, and for 11 minutes she didn't time it. But it was about 11 minutes. Vivian Ashford forgot to be afraid of anything at all. The check came eventually, and Wade reached for it, and Vivian's hand came down flat on top of his before he could pick it up. It was the first time they'd touched. His hand was rough and warm and steady under hers, and they both went still for half a second. Both of them aware of it, and then Vivian said very evenly, "Don't. Please. Let me do this one thing. It's 2 kids' pastas and some lemonade, ma'am. It's nothing. It is not nothing." She said it harder than she meant to. She heard it come out of her too hard with too much underneath it, and she saw him hear it too. "You fed my son the first dinner he's enjoyed in I don't know how long. You handed me a breadbasket like it was, you have no idea what..." She stopped. She was Vivian Ashford. She did not say sentences like that. She did not start sentences she couldn't finish. She took her hand off his. "Let me pay for the pasta," she said quietly. "It's the only thing in this whole room I actually know how to do." Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he let go of the check. "All right," he said. "But only because you said please. I don't think a lot of people get to hear you say please. No, Vivian admitted. They don't. The kids were saying goodbye now, the urgent, enormous goodbye of children who have just discovered each other and cannot believe the universe means to separate them. Lily was telling Sam he had to come see Biscuit, except Biscuit wasn't her dog, but she could ask. Sam was saying Lily had to come to his house. He had a whole room of toys he never even played with. She could have any of them. Sam, Vivian said gently. Can I have her number? Sam said to his mother with that open face again. So I can call her, please, Mom, please. And there it was again. The word he never used. Please. Twice in one night from a boy who'd learned not to ask because asking in his short life had mostly meant waiting for a no. Vivian looked across the table at Wade Coleman. Wade looked back. There was a question in it, an honest one. Do you want this, or are you just being kind? He wasn't going to make it easy for her. He wasn't going to push. He was a man she was beginning to understand who did not push, who simply stood his ground and let the world decide what it wanted to do about him. I'd have to give you mine, Vivian said slowly. I don't give people my number. I figured, Wade said. There are maybe 9 people on Earth who have it. Then I won't be offended if I'm not number 10. And that the easiness of it, the total absence of grasping the way he handed her back her own out without a flicker of resentment. That was what did it. That was the thing that made Vivian Ashford pick up the pen the waiter had left with the check and tear the corner off the receipt and write down 10 digits that no journalist, no rival, no board member had ever been given. She slid it across the table. The same 6 inches the breadbasket had traveled. Number 10, she said. Wade looked at the torn scrap of paper. He didn't grab it. He picked it up the way you pick up something somebody trusts you with careful, and he folded it once and put it in the breast pocket of the faded blue shirt over his heart, and he said, Lily's going to be real glad to hear from your boy. Sam, Vivian said, standing gathering her son. Say thank you to Mr. Coleman. Thank you, Mr. Coleman, Sam said. And then, before anyone could stop him, the boy stepped forward and threw his arms around Wade Coleman's waist and hugged him. Hugged him hard, the way you hug something you don't want to leave. And Wade went still and put one big hand on the back of the boy's head, very gently, the way he must have put his hand on his own daughter's head 10,000 nights. And Vivian Ashford stood there in the most expensive restaurant in the city and watched her son hold on to a stranger and could not move at all. Across the dining room, 60 feet away, the whispering woman had her phone up. And under the white tablecloth, where no one could see Vivian's own hands, had started very slightly to shake, and it wasn't the leak, and it wasn't the board, and it wasn't Howard Pell. It was the realization arriving all at once that the safest her child had looked in years was right now in the arms of a man whose last name she'd learned 40 minutes ago. Sam let go. He took his mother's hand. And as they walked out of Belcourt, past the good tables, past the window, past Gerard who bowed and did not understand a thing he had just witnessed, Sam looked up at his mother and said, Mom, he felt like a dad. Vivian's step did not break. Years of cameras had taught her how to keep walking when something hit her. But she didn't answer him. Because there was no answer she could give a 6-year-old that was both true and bearable, and Vivian Ashford had spent her whole life refusing to say things that weren't true. She just held his hand a little tighter and walked him out into the cold, where the black Suburban was waiting with its engine running and its doors that someone else would open, and for the first time in a very long time, the warmth she was walking away from felt more real than the world she was walking back into. The call came 9 days later, and it came at 6:40 in the morning, and Wade Coleman almost didn't answer it, because he didn't recognize the number, and he was elbow-deep in a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing the floor mats of a delivery truck that wasn't his at a depot that paid him by the vehicle, not the hour. He wiped his hand on his jeans and looked at the screen. An unfamiliar set of digits. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then he remembered the torn scrap of receipt folded in the breast pocket of a shirt, now sitting in his laundry basket, and he picked up. Coleman. It's Vivian Ashford. He straightened. A truck idled somewhere behind him. Ms. Ashford. Everything all right? My son hasn't stopped asking about your daughter for 9 days. There was something in her voice he hadn't heard at the restaurant, a fray in it, a thinness, like a wire pulled too tight. He asks about Lily the way other children ask about Christmas. He drew her a picture. He's been carrying it around. He wants to give it to her. I told him I'd ask. Wade looked at the picture forming in his head. A small boy in a too-clean blazer, carrying a drawing around a giant cold house for 9 days, waiting, and something in his chest pulled. Lily talks about Sam every single night, he said. Last night she asked me if rich kids have to go to bed earlier. I told her I had no idea. He heard very faintly something that might have been a laugh. It surprised him. He hadn't been sure she could. They have to go to bed whenever I'm not home to tell them otherwise, Vivian said, which is most nights. A pause. Mr. Coleman, I'm calling to ask if I can do something I have absolutely no practice at, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't make it harder than it has to be. I wouldn't dream of it. I'd like to invite you and Lily to dinner. At my home. Not a thing. Not anything. Just the kids. Sam wants to show her the room of toys he doesn't play with, and I... She stopped. He waited. He was good at waiting. It was a thing the Navy had drilled into him until it became part of his bones. I would like to see my son look the way he looked in that restaurant one more time, she finished. Before I forget what it looked like. Wade was quiet for a moment. Saturday, he said. Saturday. What can we bring? Nothing. God, nothing. You'll bring a child, and that's already more than I deserve. We'll bring a pie, Wade said. Lily and I make a peach pie. It's the only thing we make, but we make it good. You don't say no to the pie, Ms. Ashford. That's the one rule. There was a silence on the line that went on a beat too long, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, gone quieter, gone careful. All right, Vivian Ashford said. I won't say no to the pie. Chatter. The house was not a house. Wade understood that the second he turned off the road and the gate opened for him. A real gate iron with a little camera that swiveled to look at his truck, and he drove up a driveway longer than some of the streets he'd grown up on. Lily had her face pressed to the window in the back, the peach pie balanced on her knees under a dish towel, and she kept saying, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And he kept saying, I see it, baby. And the truth was, he didn't, he couldn't, it was too much to see. Sam was waiting at the front door before they'd even parked. He was waiting the way a dog waits, the whole body pointed, and the instant Lily's door opened, he was off the steps and running, and he hit her in a hug that nearly sent the pie flying, and Wade caught it one-handed without thinking. The way you catch things when keeping your hands ready is a habit you never lost. You came, Sam was shouting. I drew you a picture. It's a dog. It's Biscuit. I drew Biscuit even though I never met him. I brought you a PIE, Lily shouted back. My dad and me made it. And the two of them were gone up the steps into the enormous house, leaving the two adults standing in the driveway, holding a pie and a child's drawing and a silence that neither of them quite knew how to fill. Vivian came out then. She was dressed down, or what passed for down, with her dark slacks and a soft gray sweater, no jewelry, her hair loose instead of pulled back, and Wade noticed because he noticed everything that she looked like she hadn't slept. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup hadn't fully chased off. You found it, she said. Hard to miss. Did the gate behave? It sticks sometimes. Behaved fine. They stood there. Wade held up the pie. The pie, he said. Something cracked through her careful face, almost a smile. The pie. He handed it over. She took it like it was breakable, like it was something other than a pie, and she looked down at it under its dish towel and said in a strange low voice, My housekeeper makes a souffle that costs more than this whole truck, and my son has never once run to the door for it. Wade didn't say anything. Some things you let a person say to the air. Come in, she said, before they break something irreplaceable, which, fair warning, is most of what's in here. Dinner was loud, which Wade suspected that house had not been in a long time. The kids ate fast so they could go play, and then they were gone thundering off down a hallway with Sam yelling about a fort. and the two adults were left at one end of a table built for 16, and a member of the staff cleared the plates so silently that Wade almost felt bad for the man having to be invisible in his own workplace. "So," Vivian said once the staff had melted away. She turned the stem of her water glass between two fingers. "You're going to think this is rude." "Probably. How does a man like you end up scrubbing trucks at 5 in the morning?" Wade leaned back. He'd known the question was coming. People in her world always wanted to know the shape of the fall. How a man got down here, as if down here were a hole he'd dug, rather than a place where most people simply lived. "A man like me," he repeated, not unkindly. "What's a man like me?" "You know what I mean. You're—" She gestured a small, frustrated motion. "You speak well. You read your daughter Tolkien. You handled a room full of people who were sneering at you with more grace than I handle a board that's afraid of me. You should be— I don't know what you should be." "Not that." "Should," Wade said. "There's that word again." He took a slow breath. "I was a corpsman, Navy. You attach to the Marines, you go where they go, and where they go is usually the worst place anybody could think to send a person. I did 3 deployments. I was good at it. I want to be clear about that, because people hear medic and they think you're soft. You're the helper, you stand in the back. You don't stand in the back. You run toward the thing everybody else is running away from, because that's where the bleeding is." Vivian had gone very still. "I was going to do 20 years, Wade said. "That was the plan. Me and Sarah, we had it all mapped. She was a nurse. We met in a hospital, if you can believe it, the most boring meet-cute in the history of the armed forces. We got married. We had Lily. And the plan was, I'd do my 20, get my pension, and we'd buy a little place with a porch and grow old, yelling at each other about the thermostat." "Sarah," Vivian said quietly. "Lily's mother." Lily's mother. Wade turned his own water glass, now the same gesture she'd made, and didn't seem to notice he was doing it. "There's a thing that happens, Ms. Ashford, when you spend years being the person who keeps everybody else alive. You start to believe it's your job to keep everybody alive. You start to believe that if you're just good enough, fast enough, calm enough, nobody you love ever has to die." The kitchen was silent. Somewhere down the hall, a child shrieked with laughter. "Sarah got sick," Wade said. "While I was overseas, 3rd deployment. It started small. She thought it was nothing. She was a nurse. She should have known. But nurses are the worst at taking care of themselves. They spend it all on other people. By the time anybody took it seriously, I was 8,000 miles away in a place where you couldn't just get on a plane." His jaw worked. "I kept 15 men alive that deployment. 15. I have the letters. Mothers' wives, I've got a drawer full of thank you letters from people whose sons came home because of me." He looked up and his eyes were dry, but there was something behind them that was worse than wet. "And I couldn't keep alive the one person I'd have traded all 15 for. Because I wasn't there. Because the Navy needed me to be 8,000 miles away keeping strangers' husbands alive." "Wade." It was the first time she'd used his first name. "I got home in time to hold her hand for 9 days, he said. 9 days. Lily was 3, and I stood in that hospital, the place we met. You understand the exact kind of place I'd spent my whole life learning to work in, and I could not do one single thing. All that training. All that I was the best in my unit at keeping people breathing, and I sat there and watched, and there was nothing I could—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He breathed once slow, the way he'd taught 100 panicking men to breathe. "So I didn't re-up. People said I was throwing away a career. My CO begged me to stay, said I was wasting a gift. And I told him the gift had already failed me when it mattered. And I had a 3-year-old who'd just lost her mother, and I was not going to also be the dad who was never home. I was not going to make her grow up the way—" He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. Vivian sat there, she who always had something to say, who could fill any silence with strategy. She sat there with nothing, because there was nothing, because the man had just laid the whole broken architecture of his life on the table between them, and the only decent thing to do was let it sit there and be seen. "So that's how a man like me ends up scrubbing trucks at 5 in the morning, Wade said finally, and his voice had come back to level. I take the jobs that let me be home for dinner. I take the jobs that don't follow me into the house. I scrub trucks, and I stock shelves, and I do night security at a warehouse 2 towns over, and none of it is what I should be doing. And all of it lets me read my daughter 4 pages of The Hobbit every single night until she snores at the dragon. He spread his rough hands. I traded the career for the dinners. I'd trade it again. I'd trade it 1,000 times. The career was never the thing I was afraid of losing. For a long moment, Vivian didn't move at all. Then she said very low, almost to herself, "I have it exactly backwards." "Ma'am, I have it exactly backwards from you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a sound with an edge that could cut. "You gave up the empire to keep the dinners. I gave up the dinners to keep the empire. I told myself I was building it for him. For Sam. I told myself every late night, every missed bedtime, every birthday I watched on a phone from a hotel in Singapore, I told myself it was all for him, that I was securing his future, that someday he'd understand." Her voice tightened. "And then 9 days ago, a man I'd never met handed my son a basket of bread and a real lemonade, and made him laugh until he had to cover his mouth. And Sam looked up at me on the way out and said—" She stopped. "What did he say?" Wade asked gently. Vivian Ashford looked at her hands. "He said you felt like a dad," she said. "He said it like a compliment. To you. He didn't even know it was the cruelest thing anyone has ever said to me. Because he doesn't have anything to compare you to. He has a mother who measures money, and a staff of people who measure him. And the first time in his life, a grown man simply sat and talked to him like he was a person. My 6-year-old's conclusion was, 'Oh, so this is what a dad is.'" Her jaw was tight. "His father's been gone since before he could walk. Took a settlement and a flight to Geneva, and I haven't seen him in 5 years. I've spent a fortune making sure Sam never wants for anything, and he wants for the one thing I can't buy, and he found it for free in a restaurant in 40 minutes from you." Wade let that sit too. "You're being awful hard on yourself," he said at last. "I'm being accurate. I'm always accurate. It's the only thing I'm reliably good at." "No," Wade said. "I don't think it is." He leaned forward. "You called me at 6:40 in the morning because your boy drew a dog and you couldn't stand to see him carry it around one more day. That's not a woman who has it backwards. That's a woman who's seeing it. There's a difference between getting it wrong and not being able to fix it. You're not the first one. You won't be the last." He paused. "And for what it's worth, he ran to the door today. For Lily. Not for me. He ran because somebody he loves was coming, and that's a thing you taught him how to do somewhere somehow, or he wouldn't know how to do it at all." Vivian looked at him. Her eyes were too bright. She blinked it back, years of cameras, Wade thought, years of learning to swallow it down where nobody could photograph it. "You're very kind," she said. "For a man, I've given exactly one reason to be." "I'm not being kind," Wade said. "I'm being accurate." And that broke through. She laughed. A real one this time, startled out of her, with her hand coming up too late to cover it, exactly the way her son had laughed in the restaurant, and Wade saw where Sam got it, and he grinned, and for a moment the giant cold table didn't feel so cold or so big. It was nearly 9 when his phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it. A name, a job. The warehouse. He sighed. "Night shift?" Vivian asked. "Night shift. Security. I cover 3 to 11, sometimes 11 to 7, depends who calls out." He started to gather himself. "I should round up the kid. She's got school." "Don't." He looked at her. "It's a Saturday," Vivian said. "There's no school tomorrow, and—" She hesitated, and he watched her wrestle with something. Watched the proud thing in her fight, the lonely thing in her, and watched the lonely thing win. "Stay a little. The kids are happy. Let them be happy a little longer. I'll have someone cover your shift." "You can't cover my shift, Ms. Ashford. That's not how—" "Wade." She said it flatly. "I own 17 warehouses. I employ 4,000 people who work night security. I promise you I can find your supervisor's number and arrange one covered shift without it troubling a single soul. Stay. Please." And there it was, again, the please, the word her son had inherited from somewhere, the word she gave out like it was made of gold because to her it nearly was. "Let me do the one thing I know how to do. I'll solve a problem with money. It's all I've got." Wade looked at her a long moment. "You really don't know how to ask for company, do you?" he said. "You only know how to buy it." It landed hard. He saw it land. For a second he thought he'd gone too far, and then Vivian Ashford's shoulders came down half an inch, some long-held tension leaving, and she said quiet and bare, "No, I don't. Will you teach me, or will you just hold it against me?" "Neither," Wade said. He set his phone back down. "I'll stay. And you don't have to cover my shift because I'll just be a man who chose to spend an evening instead of work it, and that's allowed even for me." He sat back down. "But I'm calling out myself. With my own thumb. There's a thing about doing your own asking, Ms. Ashford. You should try it sometime. It's terrible. You feel it in your stomach. That's how you know it counts." She watched him pull out his phone and text his supervisor. "Coleman can't make tonight, family thing won't happen again," and watched him press send with a small grimace, like swallowing medicine, and something in her face came open that hadn't been open all night, all 9 days, maybe all year. "There," Wade said. "Felt it in my stomach. It counted." He picked up the dish towel that had covered the pie. "Now, we never actually cut into the thing. You said you wouldn't say no to the pie. I'm holding you to it." They cut the pie into the kitchen island, the kids dragged back in by the smell of it. And for an hour, the house that had been built for board members and quiet sounded like a house with children in it, which was the thing it had been built to never sound like. Lily explained the pie's entire construction in exhausting detail. Sam ate 2 pieces and asked for a third, and Vivian opened her mouth to say no, and then, watching Wade simply not say no to his own kid, closed it again and let him have it. "He never eats like this," she murmured to Wade over the kids' heads. "Happy kids eat," Wade said. "It's like the laughing. It comes from the same place." And then it was the front step again. Late the kids drooping Lily, already half asleep against Wade's shoulder, and Sam fighting it hard, fighting sleep, the way he fought everything, because going to sleep meant the day ending, and the day ending meant Lily leaving. "When can she come back?" Sam demanded. "Tomorrow, Mom. Tomorrow." "Not tomorrow, sweetheart. Lily has—" "Soon," Wade said. "I promise. Hey." He crouched down Lily, and all to be level with the boy. "You know what I do when I miss somebody, and I have to wait to see them." Sam shook his head big-eyed. "I think about the next time," Wade said. "I don't think about how long it is. I think about the thing. Like next time you're gonna show Lily that fort all the way finished. Right? So instead of counting the days you build the fort, you make the next time good. And then the waiting's got a job to do. You see." Sam considered this with enormous seriousness. "I'll build the fort," he said. "You build the fort." Vivian watched her son nod solemn and comforted a problem in his small chest, visibly easing, because a man had given him a way to carry it, and she thought, that's it, that's the whole thing. That's what I can't do. I can solve any problem on earth except the one inside my own child. Wade stood. Lily was fully asleep now, dead weight, her face mashed into his neck. "Thank you," Vivian said. "For the pie. For all of it. For telling me about Sarah. You didn't have to." "No," Wade agreed. "I didn't." "Then why did you—" He shifted his sleeping daughter higher on his shoulder and looked at the woman in the doorway of her enormous, cold, beautiful house, and he said, "Because you looked like somebody who needed to hear that a person can lose the whole map and still find their kid in the dark. I don't know what's eating you, Ms. Ashford. You haven't said, and I haven't asked. But you've got the face of somebody fighting something big and fighting it alone, and I know that face, I've worn it, and I just wanted you to know." He paused. "The Empire's not the thing. Whatever they're trying to take from you, it's not the thing. Don't let them make you believe it's the thing." Vivian Ashford stood very still in her doorway. "How did you know," she said slowly, "that someone's trying to take something from me?" "I didn't," Wade said. "Your face did. Good night, Ms. Ashford." And he carried his sleeping daughter down the long steps to the old truck, and Vivian stood in the door and watched the taillights go all the way down the endless driveway and through the gate that stuck sometimes until they were gone. And then she went back inside into the silence, and the silence was worse than it had ever been before, because now she knew exactly what it was the absence of. The silence didn't last. Monday came, and Monday was war. She felt it the moment she walked into the building, the way the lobby went quiet, the way two executives stepped into an elevator to avoid sharing hers, the way her own assistant Diane met her at the elevator with a face the color of paper and a tablet held against her chest like a shield. "It's worse," Diane said before Vivian had said a word. "Over the weekend. It's worse." "How much worse?" "Pell's got the votes lined up for an emergency session. He's framing it as concern. Concern for your well-being." Diane's voice was acid. "He's circulating the leak with there's a narrative now, that you're erratic, overextended, that the company's exposed because too much is concentrated in you, and you're—" She swallowed, "unstable." Vivian's heels did not slow on the marble. "Unstable. That's the word being used, in rooms, by people, and the source of this concern for my well-being." "There's footage," Diane said quietly. "Vivian, there's footage of you. In a restaurant. Standing up looking. They're saying panicked, and then sitting down at some back table with a man nobody can identify, and they're cutting it, so it looks like you had some kind of episode, and then—" Vivian stopped walking. The whole hallway seemed to stop with her. "Belcourt," she said. "They're saying you came apart in public," Diane whispered. "That you abandoned your son, had a breakdown, and were consoled. That's the word in the write-up, consoled by an unidentified man. There are pictures. The board has them. Pell has them. He's saying it shows you're not that you can't." And Vivian Ashford stood in the middle of her own building in the empire she had built from a dying company with 20 years of missed bedtimes, and understood all at once with the cold, total clarity that had made her rich exactly what had happened. The whispering woman. 2 tables over. The phone up. They had taken the single warmest hour she'd had in a year. Her son laughing a stranger's kindness. A breadbasket slid across a table, and they had cut it into a weapon. They had taken the one time she'd let herself be a mother in public instead of a machine, and they were going to use it to prove she was unfit to lead. "Get me the footage," Vivian said. Her voice had gone somewhere very cold and very level. "All of it. The original, not their cut. And get me everything we have on who was at that restaurant Saturday, no, the night I was there, the night 9 days ago. Reservations, staff, everyone. Vivian, the session is Thursday. That's 3 days. I'm aware of what day it is, Diane." She started walking again, faster now, the heels striking the marble like a countdown. "Howard Pell wants to use my son's happiness against me. He wants to take the best 40 minutes I've had in years and turn it into the thing that ends me." Her jaw set. "He's going to find out what happens to people who do that." But even as she said it, even as the old machine roared back to life in her chest, the strategist, the closer the woman who had never once lost a fight she'd decided to win, there was a small cold knowledge underneath it that she could not push down. The footage was real. She had stood up in a panic. She had looked for 1 second like a woman coming apart. And the worst part, the part Pell could never know but that frightened her more than any board vote, was that she had been coming apart, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of seeing for the first time everything she'd traded away. They were going to use her one true moment to call her a liar. And she had no idea, none at all, how you fought a lie that was wrapped around a truth. She got into her office. She shut the door. And for one moment before the strategist took over completely, Vivian Ashford did something she had not done at the office in 11 years. She took out her phone and she looked at a number she'd saved under no name at all, just 10 digits and nothing else. And her thumb hovered over it, and she thought about a man who'd said the empire's not the thing. And she thought about how he'd known from her face that somebody was trying to take something from her. She didn't call. Not yet. She wasn't ready to need him. But she didn't delete it either. She set the phone down on the desk face up where she could see it, and then she turned to the window to the city she'd spent her life conquering, and she began very quietly and very coldly to plan the defense of everything she had, without the first idea that the man who would actually save her wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a strategist, wasn't anyone in any boardroom she could think of. He was at that exact moment 8 miles away, scrubbing the floor mats of a truck that wasn't his, with a torn scrap of receipt folded in his shirt pocket, over his heart, where he'd kept it all week. She held out for 2 days. 2 days of lawyers in and out of her office, of Diane bringing her cold coffee. She didn't drink of the original Bellecourt footage played and replayed on a monitor until Vivian could recite her own collapse frame by frame. And the more she watched it, the worse it got, because the lawyers kept saying the same useless thing. We can argue context, we can argue it's misleading. And Vivian kept saying that's not enough because she knew Howard Pell. She'd helped build the man, she'd promoted him twice, and she knew that Howard Pell did not bring a knife to a fight. He wasn't already certain he'd won. By Wednesday morning, she had not slept. By Wednesday morning, she had read the board members' faces in 3 separate calls and counted the votes. The way you count water rising. And the count was bad. And the lawyers were out of ideas. And the strategist in her, the closer the woman who had never lost, was staring at a wall for the first time in 20 years and finding no door in it. That was when Sam came into her study at 6:15 in the morning, dragging his blanket, and climbed into her lap, uninvited, which he never did, and put his head against her chest and said, "Mom, you have your scared face." She went still. "I don't have a scared face, baby." "You do. You have it right now." He looked up at her. "When can Lily come back? Mr. Coleman said next time I show her the fort." "The fort's done, Mom. I built it. He said build the fort and then the waiting has a job. The fort's done." And Vivian Ashford sat there with her son's whole small weight against her, with the count of the votes going bad in her head, and the lawyers out of ideas, and her empire coming apart in 3 days. And she heard a man's voice from 9 days ago say, "Don't let them make you believe it's the thing." And she heard him say, "You only know how to buy company." And she heard him say, "Try doing your own asking. It's terrible, that's how you know it counts." She picked up her phone. Her thumb found the number with no name. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Ashford did a thing that frightened her more than any board vote she asked for help from someone she could not pay, could not control, and did not have any leverage over at all. He picked up on the second ring. "Coleman?" "It's Vivian." Her voice did something it never did. It wavered. "Ashford, I know whose number this is." A pause. She could hear him reading her tone the way he read everything. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. She closed her eyes. Sam was watching her face. She turned away from him toward the window. Sam wants to see Lily. He built the fort. You told him to build the fort and he built it, and now he's asking and Vivian." His voice was quiet and level, and it cut straight through. "That's not why you called. Try again." And the thing in her chest that she'd been holding clenched tight for 2 days. The strategist, the armor, the woman who didn't waver, it came loose all at once, and she heard herself say in a voice she didn't recognize, "I'm in trouble. The thing you saw in my face. The thing somebody's trying to take. They're taking it. And I don't. Wade. I have lawyers. I have the best lawyers money can buy, and they can't. They keep saying context. They keep saying, we'll argue it's misleading and it's not working. And I have 2 days and I..." Her voice broke clean in half. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this, and there's no one I can say that to. Do you understand? There is not one single person in my entire life I can say I don't know how to do this to, except a man I met in a restaurant 9 days ago who scrubs trucks, and I'm so..." "Where are you?" Wade said. "What? Where are you right now? Home or the office?" "Home, my study." "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Wade said. "I'll bring Lily. Sam can show her the fort. And you're going to make me a cup of coffee, and you're going to tell me the whole thing from the start, slow every piece, the way you'd brief somebody who's got to walk into a bad situation cold. Can you do that?" Wade, you don't, this is corporate. This is boardroom politics. This isn't something you can. Vivian. There was steel in it now. The calm, flat steel she'd heard once before when he'd told a senior waiter she's fine, and ended the conversation. I've walked into worse rooms than a boardroom with worse odds than yours, and I came out the other side. Make the coffee. Brief me clean. We'll see what we're looking at. A pause. And Vivian, yes, you did the terrible thing. You asked, felt it in your stomach, didn't you? Yes, she whispered. Good, Wade said. That's how you know it counts. 40 minutes. He came in 40 minutes with his daughter and a paper bag of donuts because he said you don't show up to a war council empty-handed, and the kids vanished toward the fort with a noise like a small stampede, and Wade Coleman sat down at Vivian Ashford's kitchen island in his work clothes and said, Start at the beginning. Who's coming for you, why, and what's the weapon? And she briefed him. She didn't soften it or strategize it or spin it the way she spun everything. She just laid it out flat the way he'd asked, because he'd asked the way you ask when you actually intend to do something with the answer. Howard Pell, number 2 for 6 years, wanted the chair. The leak internal financials made to look worse than they were timed to a quarter that already looked soft. The narrative Vivian was erratic overextended a single point of failure. And the proof the centerpiece, the thing that turned a business argument into a personal execution, the footage. Her standing up in a panic at Belcourt. Her sitting down at a stranger's table. Cut to look like a breakdown. Cut to look like a woman coming apart who had to be consoled by an unidentified man. Wade listened to all of it without moving. He had a way of listening she noticed that made you feel heard in a way that was almost physical, like the listening had weight. He didn't interrupt. He didn't take notes. He just took it in, all of it, the way she imagined he'd once taken in a casualty report, under fire, fast, complete, sorting what mattered from what didn't. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Show me the footage. Their cut and the original. Both. She pulled it up on her tablet. He watched their cut first, the edited version, the one circulating, the one built to destroy her. He watched it twice. Then he watched the original, the full, unbroken security feed from the corner of Belcourt's ceiling, the whole 40 minutes, and he watched that twice, and somewhere in the second viewing, Vivian noticed his face change. Not much. A narrowing. The same look he'd had reading the room at the restaurant, reading her face in the driveway. The look of a man seeing something nobody else had seen yet. Play me the part where you stand up again, he said. The original, real speed. She played it. There. His finger came down on the screen, pausing it. Right there. What's that? That's me standing up. That's the part they're using. That's the panic. That's not panic, Wade said. Vivian, look at it. Look at it. I've seen panic. Panic is frozen. Panic is the eyes going wide and the body locking up and the breath going high and fast. That's not what your body's doing. He stepped the footage forward frame by frame with a steadiness that suggested he'd done this kind of careful watching before in rooms with much higher stakes. Watch your eyes. They're not wide. They're searching. You're not coming apart. You're scanning the room. You stood up and you went straight to scanning left to right. Low, you're looking at the floor level. You're looking down, not around. You know what that is. What is it? That's a parent who can't find her kid. Wade looked at her. That's the most natural thing a body does. You looked up, your boy was gone. And your whole system fired. But it didn't fire into panic. It fired into search. You stood and you found him with your eyes in under 2 seconds. And then your shoulders came down. Watch. He played it. There, the stand, the scan, the lock, the shoulders dropping. 2 seconds. A panicking person doesn't recover in 2 seconds. A mother who just located her missing child does. Their cut ends right here. He froze it at the stand, before the recovery. They cut the 2 seconds that prove you weren't panicking. They cut the part where you find him. Vivian stared at the screen. She had watched that footage 40 times. Her lawyers had watched it 100. And not one of them, not one highly paid expert in the room, had seen what a Navy combat medic saw in 2 viewings. Because none of them had ever stood in a place where the difference between panic and search was the difference between a man living and dying, and so none of them knew there was a difference at all. "My God," she said softly. "It's findable. It's in the footage. The proof I wasn't panicking is in their own footage in the part they cut." "It's in the footage," Wade agreed. "But that's not even the strong part." "That's not the strong part." "No, ma'am." He sat back. "The strong part is the why. Why'd you stand up? They want to make it look like you cracked under the corporate pressure, that the leak, the stress, the quarter, that it all hit you at once, and you came apart in public. That's the story. She's unstable. But that's not why you stood up at all. You stood up because a 6-year-old slid out of his chair and walked across a restaurant." He leaned in. "Vivian, the thing they're using to prove you're an unfit leader is footage of you being a mother. That's the whole story they've got. And the second anyone sees what you actually stood up for, not a board memo, not a stock price, your kid, the whole thing flips. They didn't catch you cracking. They caught you loving your son. And they were stupid enough to think those two things look the same." Vivian sat very still. "They look the same to people who've never had to choose between the two," Wade said quietly. Howard Pell looked at that footage and saw weakness because Howard Pell has never once in his life stood up in the middle of something important because a child needed him. So he doesn't recognize it. He genuinely can't tell the difference between a woman falling apart and a woman who'd burn the whole room down to find her boy. And that, Wade tapped the table. That is the hole in his whole case. He built a weapon out of the one thing he doesn't understand, and you can drive a truck through it. Barbara. She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was unsteady in a different way than before, not breaking now, but rebuilding. "Even if you're right," she said, "even if it flips, Pell has the votes. He spent 2 days lining them up. It doesn't matter how good the truth is if I can't get 9 people in a room to look at it before they vote." "How many's he got?" "I count 7 solid. He needs 9 for the emergency removal. There are 11 seats besides mine, so he needs 9 of 11. He's got 7, and he's working the last 2 hard. Patricia Vance and a man named Okafor. Vance is a maybe. Okafor." She shook her head. "Okafor's the one I can't read." "Tell me about Okafor." "Daniel Okafor. Joined the board 4 years ago. Quiet, careful, never tips his hand. Pell's been in his ear all week. I have no idea where he lands." Wade thought about it. "What's Pell telling Okafor? What's the pitch?" "The same pitch he's telling everyone. That I'm a liability, that the company's too dependent on me, that I'm one breakdown away from tanking the stock, that they need to act now for the good of the shareholders before you can defend yourself," Wade finished. "That's the tell, by the way. Act now, act fast. No time to look closely. Every bad operation I ever saw run on the same fuel, speed, and fear. No time to check, just move. You know why? Because the second anybody slows down and actually looks, it falls apart." He stood up, started pacing slow, the way a man paces when the gears are turning. "Pell's whole play is speed. Emergency session. Move before Thursday. Vote before anybody watches the full footage. He doesn't actually have a case. He has a clock. He's not betting they'll agree with him. He's betting they won't have time to disagree." He stopped. "So you take away the clock," he said. "You slow it down. You make them look. How it's already scheduled. I can't cancel my own removal hearing. You don't cancel it. You walk into it." Wade turned to face her. "You don't run from the footage. You bring it. The full thing. You put it up on the screen yourself before Pell can play his cut, and you walk them through it frame by frame the way I just walked you through it. The stand, the scan, the 2 seconds, the find, the shoulders coming down. And then you tell them what you stood up for. You make 11 people watch a mother find her child. And you let Howard Pell sit there and explain to a room full of people, half of whom are parents, why a woman standing up to find her 6-year-old is grounds for removal." Vivian's pulse had started to climb. "And if Pell objects, if he tries to stop me from playing it, Then he's the one trying to keep the room from looking at the evidence, Wade said. And you say so, out loud. My colleague would prefer you didn't see the full footage. Ask yourself why. A grim flicker crossed his face. That's the thing about a man who's built his whole attack on a lie wrapped around a truth, Vivian. The second you unwrap it in front of everyone, he can't grab it back. He can only stand there while it comes apart in his hands. She was on her feet now, too, without having noticed standing. I'd need the original footage authenticated. Time-stamped chain of custody so nobody can claim I doctored it. Can your people do that by Thursday? By tonight. Then do it tonight. And I'd need God. I'd need to know who leaked the footage in the first place, because the cut had to come from somewhere. Somebody pulled that security feed and edited it and got it to Pell. And if I can show the board that the whole thing was a coordinated leak and not some organic concern about my well-being. Now you're cooking, Wade said. Who has access to a restaurant's security feed? The restaurant. And... She stopped dead. And anyone the restaurant gives it to. Belcourt. Wade Belcourt's owner. The generous patron who donated Lily's prize dinner. I never thought to ask who owns that restaurant. Find out, Wade said quietly. And I'd bet you the last dollar in my pocket, which is not many dollars, that when you find out who owns Belcourt, you find a thread that runs straight back to Howard Pell. She found out in 90 minutes. Diane called back while Wade was outside watching the kids tear around the half-finished fort, while Vivian stood at the window, watching him watch them, watching the easy way he stood with his hands in his pockets and let two children believe they'd built something magnificent out of patio furniture and bed sheets. You were right, Diane said, and Vivian's whole body went cold and bright at once. Belcourt's owned through a holding company. Took me 3 shells to get through it. The holding company's controlled by a private equity group. And the private equity group, Vivian the managing partner, it's Pell's brother-in-law. His wife's brother. Gerald Pell Hartman. Vivian closed her eyes. The maitre d', she said softly. Gerard. What? Nothing. Keep going. It gets better. Or worse, depending. I pulled the reservation logs from that night like you asked. Vivian, your dinner reservation. The one you called ahead for. It wasn't logged the way a normal reservation gets logged. It was flagged. There's a notation on it, an internal one. VIP notify GPH. Gerald Pell Hartman. The restaurant flagged your reservation to Pell's brother-in-law the moment you booked it. The room tilted very slightly and then righted itself, and in its place came something cold and clear and almost calm, the feeling Vivian got at the exact moment a fight stopped being something happening to her and became something she could win. They knew I was coming, she said. Before I walked in the door. They knew, and they had the cameras ready, and they were waiting for me to do one human thing they could film. Her voice had gone very quiet and very even. This wasn't a leak, Diane. A leak is when something gets out by accident. This was a trap. They built a trap, and they baited it with my own son's dinner reservation, and they sat there and waited for a 6-year-old to slide out of his chair so they could catch his mother loving him. There's more. Diane's voice had gone hushed. The donated prize dinner. Lily Coleman's science fair prize. The generous patron who donated it to the school district. Don't tell me. It was donated through the same holding company 3 weeks ago. Vivian, I don't think the Colemans being at that restaurant was a coincidence at all. I think somebody put them there. And Vivian Ashford turned from the window and looked out at the man in the yard, the man who'd scrubbed trucks at 5 that morning and driven across the city to brief her like a soldier, and was now letting 2 children believe they were architects. And a thought went through her so cold it stopped her breath. They used him too. Whoever did this, they didn't just trap me. They needed something for me to react to. They needed a moment. So they engineered one. They donated a prize to a school. They steered a science fair-winning little girl and her widower father to a specific restaurant on a specific night. They flagged the reservation, and they aimed 2 innocent people at me like a lure, like bait, and they had no idea. None that the bait would turn out to be the one person on Earth who could see exactly how the trap was built. She had to sit down. Vivian, Diane said, are you there? I'm here. She pressed a hand to her mouth, then took it away. Diane, listen to me very carefully. I need 3 things tonight, and I need them clean, and I need them documented so tight that not one person in that room can call them anything but proven fact. I need the original Belcourt footage authenticated with full chain of custody. I need the ownership structure of that restaurant mapped all the way to Gerald Pell Hartman with the reservation flag and the notify GPH notation pulled and time-stamped. And I need the paper trail on that donated school prize, every shell, every transfer, every date laid out so that a 12-year-old could follow it from Pell's brother-in-law's holding company to a little girl's science fair. Vivian, that's by Thursday. That's the job, Diane. That's the whole job. Get the forensic accountants. Get whoever you have to get. Pay whatever it costs. She stood again. Because on Thursday morning, Howard Pell is going to walk into that boardroom thinking he's about to remove me for being unstable, and instead, he's going to find out that I have proof he engineered the entire thing. The leak wasn't a leak. The footage was a trap, and the trap was built on the back of an innocent man and his daughter, which means it's not corporate maneuvering anymore. It's a conspiracy. And conspiracies have paper. She hung up. She walked to the back door. She opened it. The cold came in, and the sound of the children and Wade Coleman turned from the fort and looked at her across the yard and read her face the way he always read her face and went still. "You found the thread," he said. "I found the thread." She came down the steps toward him, slow. "Wade, it goes deeper than I thought. The restaurant. The footage. It wasn't a leak, it was a trap they were waiting for me. And—" She stopped in front of him, and for a moment she couldn't get the rest out because of what it meant, because of what it would do to him to hear it. "And I have to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. And I'm sorry because you don't deserve it, and neither does Lily." Wade's jaw set. The lightness went out of him. The medic came into his eyes, the man who braced for bad news, because bracing was a thing he'd learned to do under fire. "Tell me," he said. "Lily's prize?" Vivian said quietly. "The science fair dinner. The reason you were at that restaurant that night." She made herself hold his eyes. "It wasn't a coincidence, Wade. Somebody donated that prize to the district 3 weeks ago through the same people who own the restaurant who happened to be Howard Pell's family. They steered you there. They needed someone for me to react to in public so they could film it. They didn't pick you by accident." Her voice dropped. "They used your daughter's science project as the bait in a trap meant for me. The proudest day of Lily's life. They turned it into a weapon, and you never even knew." For a long moment, Wade Coleman didn't move at all. Then, something came into his face that Vivian had not seen there before, not in the restaurant, not in the driveway, not when he'd told her about Sarah. Something cold and old and very, very still. The face she understood of a man who had spent years running toward the thing everyone else ran from, and who had just learned that someone had used his motherless child as bait. "They used Lily," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice had gone flat and quiet, and somehow that was worse than if he'd shouted. "They used Lily." Wade looked over at the fort where his 7-year-old was at that exact moment crowning Sam with a colander and pronouncing him King of the Blanket Kingdom. Both children shrieking with joy, neither of them with the faintest idea that their entire friendship had been born inside someone else's trap. When Wade turned back to Vivian, the stillness in his face had hardened into something she recognized because it was the same thing that had carried her through 20 years of war rooms, except his was older and deeper and came from places she'd never had to go. "Okay," Wade said softly. "Okay. Then I'm not just helping you walk into that room anymore, Ms. Ashford. Wade. They came after my little girl." He said it with no heat at all, which was the most frightening thing about it. "They took the best day she ever had, and they made it into a knife, and they pointed it at a good woman, and they used my Lily to hold the handle, so no." His hands had come out of his pockets. They were steady. They were always steady. "I'm not just helping. I'm in. All the way in. You tell me what you need and where you need me to stand, And on Thursday morning, we are going to walk into that room together, and we are going to show 11 people exactly what kind of man Howard Pell is. And Vivian Ashford, standing in her own backyard with her empire 3 days from ruin and a trap closing around her that she hadn't even known was there until an hour ago, looked at the single father who'd just enlisted in her war, and for the first time since Monday, for the first time in longer than that, she was not afraid. "Thursday morning," she said. "Thursday morning," Wade agreed. Behind them, the king of the blanket kingdom fell off his throne, laughing, and neither of the children heard a word. They worked through Wednesday night. Not in an office. Vivian made that call early, and it surprised her chief of staff, who had expected a war room of lawyers and a long table of legal pads. Instead, Vivian set them up at her own kitchen island, the same island where Wade had eaten donuts, and called her case wide open, because she told Diane the lawyers would argue and hedge and tell her all the ways it could go wrong, and what she needed tonight wasn't caution. What she needed was a man who'd planned operations where being wrong got people killed, and who therefore did not waste a single second being wrong on purpose. So, it was the three of them. Vivian, Wade, and Diane, who Wade had won over, completely inside 10 minutes, by the simple act of asking her name, and then using it. And the two children asleep upstairs. Lily in a guest room that was bigger than Wade's apartment. Sam down the hall. Both of them worn out from the blanket kingdom, and dreaming, neither of them aware that downstairs, 3 adults were assembling the pieces of a trap to spring back on the people who'd built it. "Walk me through the room," Wade said somewhere around 11. He had a legal pad in front of him, and on it, in small square handwriting, he'd been mapping something. Not the agenda, the room. Where does everyone sit? Who looks at who? Who does Pell trust to follow his lead, and who's he nervous about? "Why does that matter?" Diane asked. "Because a room's a piece of terrain," Wade said, not looking up. "Same as any other. There's high ground and low ground, there's cover, and there's exposure. Pell's going to set the room up to feel like a foregone conclusion. Everybody seated the vote, cued the energy, moving one direction fast. My job is to know where the cracks are before we walk in. So when Vivian opens the thing up, I know which faces to watch and which way it's going to break." Vivian pulled a chair around and sat. "There's a long table. Pell will take the head. He won't wait for me. He'll assume the head. That's the first thing he'll do. Plant himself at the head of my table to set the tone that it's already his." "Good. Let him." Wade made a note. A man who grabs the head of the table early is a man who needs the chair to make him feel like he's already won. That's not strength. That's a tell. Keep going. Who's beside him? His allies cluster left. The 4 oldest board members, Reyes, Tan, Brennan, and Holloway. They've voted with Pell on everything for 2 years. He's got them solid. "Those 4 don't matter then," Wade said. "You're not changing their minds, and you don't need to. Don't waste a word on them. Where's the maybe? Where's Vance?" "Patricia Vance sits to my right. Normally, if I'm even allowed to sit." A grim note crept into Vivian's voice. "She's a maybe. Pell's worked her hard, but Patricia has 2 kids of her own, and she's the only board member who's ever asked me about Sam, actually asked like she meant it, not the polite thing people do." Wade's pen stopped. He looked up. "Then Vance is who you're talking to," he said. "The whole time. Not Pell, not the room. You build the entire thing for one woman with 2 kids who's already asked about your son once. You make Patricia Vance see a mother. Everybody else in that room is doing math. Vance is the one who can still feel something. So you aim the human part of this straight at her, and you let the proof handle the rest." "And Okafor. Tell me about Okafor again, the one you can't read." "Daniel Okafor. Quiet. Pell's been in his ear all week. I genuinely don't know where he lands." Wade tapped the pen against the pad twice, thinking. A man nobody can read is usually a man who's deciding on something other than the politics. The political ones tip their hand. They have to. They're trading. They want you to know what they want. The quiet ones are the ones running it through some private standard of their own. Conscience, usually. Or something they've seen. He set the pen down. "We don't aim at Okafor. We can't. We don't know the door. We just give him the truth clean and trust that a man who decides by his own standard will decide right if you put the right thing in front of him." He looked back down at his map of the room, then up at Vivian. "Here's how it goes," he said. "And then we drill it till you can do it half asleep, because the room's going to be loud and fast and full of fear, and the only way you stay clean in a room like that is if your body already knows the moves before your head catches up." He laid it out the way he must once have laid out an operation in clean sequence, each step, depending on the one before it, no wasted motion. Pell would open. He'd open fast, framing it as concern for Vivian, concern for the company, and he'd move to play his cut of the footage early while the room was still cold before anyone had settled, because the cut only worked on a cold room on people who hadn't looked closely, and Pell knew it. "So you don't let him play it first," Wade said. "You get there before him, procedurally. Diane, can she do that? Can she claim the floor before Pell plays his evidence?" Diane, who had been a corporate secretary for 11 years and knew the board's bylaws. The way Wade knew anatomy, nodded slowly. "If she's the subject of a removal action, she has the right to address the board before any vote. It's in the bylaws. Pell can't deny it without looking like he's denying her due process. If she invokes it the second the session opens before he gets to his presentation, yes, she can get the floor first." "Then that's the first move," Wade said. "Vivian opens the session by invoking her right to speak. Calm, procedural. You don't sound scared and you don't sound angry. You sound like a woman exercising a right that's obviously hers. And the first thing you do with that floor, you put up the full footage, the original, before Pell can show his version. You take his weapon and you fire it first, except you fire the whole thing, not the cut." "And I walk them through it," Vivian said. "The way you walked me through it. The way I walked you through it. Slow, the stand, the scan, the 2 seconds, the shoulders coming down." Wade leaned in. "But here's the part that matters most, and you have to do it exactly right or it doesn't land. You don't tell them you weren't panicking. You make them see it themselves, and then you ask Patricia Vance by name one question." "What question?" "You stop the footage on the frame where you're scanning the floor, and you look at Patricia Vance and you say, 'Patricia, you have 2 children. I'm going to ask you to look at this one frame and tell this room what you think you're looking at. Not what you've been told it is. What your own eyes as a mother tell you it is." Wade held her gaze. "And then you shut up. You don't fill the silence. You let Patricia Vance look at a frame of a mother searching for her child, and you let her say out loud in front of everyone what it actually is. Because the moment one parent in that room names it, that's a mother looking for her kid. Pell's whole story is dead. He can't unring it. He needed 11 people to see a breakdown, and instead one of them just told the room she sees a mother." Vivian was very still. "And if Vance won't say it, if Pell's gotten to her and she stays quiet, then you've still planted it," Wade said. "And you move to the next thing, which is the part that ends him anyway. Because the footage flips the story. But the paper trail Belcourt, the brother-in-law, the flagged reservation, the donated prize, that doesn't just flip the story. That proves a crime. That proves Howard Pell didn't stumble onto a leak. He manufactured one. He built a trap and baited it with a child's science fair and lay in wait for a mother to love her son in public so he could film it and call it madness." Wade's voice didn't rise, but it went hard as bone. "And a board can argue all day about whether a CEO's too stressed. But no board on earth can keep a man who engineered a conspiracy against the company's own chair using forged urgency and a falsified leak. The second you put that paper on the table, it stops being a vote about you. It becomes a vote about him." Diane had gone pale. "It's true," she said softly. "Once the conspiracy's documented, the leak alone is a breach of fiduciary duty. He pulled internal financials and weaponized them. That's not politics, that's actionable. Vivian, if you can prove the timeline, the board doesn't just keep you. They have to remove him. They'd be exposed if they didn't." "We can prove the timeline," Vivian said. She pulled the authenticated file folder toward her, the one the forensic accountants had finished an hour ago, chain of custody intact. every shell company mapped, every date, stamped the donated prize traced from Gerald Pell Hartman's holding company straight to a second-grade science fair. It's all here, every piece. Then you've got him, Wade said. But Vivian, listen to me. You do not lead with the paper. Why not? It's the strongest thing I have. Because the paper proves you win, Wade said. But the footage proves you're right. And there's a difference, and the order matters more than anything else we've talked about tonight. He leaned forward, both forearms on the island. If you walk in and drop the conspiracy paper first, you win an ugly fight. You destroy a man with documents, and everybody in that room is scared of you afterward. And you keep your chair, but you keep it the way you've kept everything, by being the most dangerous person in the building. And that's not who you want to be anymore. I've watched you for 2 weeks. That's not who you actually are. Vivian didn't say anything. So you lead with the footage, Wade said quietly. You lead with the mother. You make them see before anything else that the thing Howard Pell called a breakdown was a woman loving her child. You let them feel it. You make Patricia Vance say it out loud. And then once the room has seen the truth with their own eyes and felt it in their own chests, then you lay down the paper that proves the man who tried to weaponize that love is a liar and a saboteur. You win their hearts first and their math second. Because a chair you keep, because they believe in you, is worth 10 times a chair you keep because they're afraid of you. He sat back. You've spent 20 years keeping rooms by being feared. Thursday, you keep one by being right. That's the whole game. That's the only thing that's different. And it's everything. For a long moment, Vivian Ashford looked at the man across her kitchen island, the combat medic, the single father, the man who scrubbed trucks at dawn and had just handed her a battle plan more sophisticated than anything her $250,000 lawyers had produced in 2 days. And she felt something move in her chest that had nothing to do with the board or the vote or Howard Pell. "Where did you learn this?" she said softly. "Really? This isn't medicine. This is you're reading that room like a battlefield." "It is a battlefield," Wade said. "Just a clean one. Nobody's bleeding." He turned the pen over in his fingers. "When you're a corpsman, you're not just the guy with the bandages. You're attached to a unit. You sit in on the briefs. You learn how the whole operation thinks because your job is to know where everybody's going to be when it goes wrong so you can get to them fast. I spent 10 years learning how men under pressure make decisions, who breaks, who holds, who follows, who freezes. A boardroom's just men under pressure in better suits." He almost smiled. "And the thing about pressure, Vivian, it's the same in every room I've ever been in. Fear makes people move too fast. Truth makes them slow down. Pell's whole plan runs on fear and speed. So we beat him with truth and patience. That's it. That's the whole war." Chapta. It was past 2 in the morning when Wade finally stood and stretched and said he should get Lily home, and Vivian said almost before he'd finished, "Stay. Both of you. It's 2 in the morning. The kids are asleep. You have a hearing to walk into in 6 hours. There are 4 guest rooms. Stay." And Wade looked at her, and for once didn't argue because she hadn't bought it this time. She'd asked it plainly the terrible way, and he could see in her face that she knew the difference now, and that she'd done it on purpose. "All right," he said. "We'll stay." He checked on Lily before he turned in. Vivian watched him do it. Watched him stand in the doorway of the enormous guest room and look at his sleeping daughter for a long moment, and she understood that the cold stillness from the backyard hadn't left him at all. It had just gone underground. The man was about to walk into a room and dismantle the people who'd used his motherless child as bait, and he was going to do it calmly and patiently and right. And the fact that he could hold all that fury that's still and that quiet told Vivian more about Wade Coleman than anything he'd said about Sarah. She found him in the hallway after. "Wade?" He turned. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "And don't say it's because they used Lily. I know that's part of it, but you came over Wednesday morning before you knew any of that. You drove across the city and briefed me like a soldier when all you knew was a stranger from a restaurant was in trouble. Why?" Wade was quiet for a moment in the dim hall. "Because you asked," he said finally. You called me at 6 in the morning and your voice broke and you said, I don't know how to do this, and there's nobody I can say it to. He looked at her steadily. Do you know how many people in my life have ever said that to me, Vivian? Said the true scared thing out loud, with nothing held back, Sarah. That's the list. That's one name. He let that sit. And then you said it. A woman who runs an empire, who's got 9 people on Earth with her phone number, who's never once in her life let anybody see the bottom of the well. You called me, and you let me see it. You think that costs nothing. It cost you everything you've spent 20 years building a wall around. And you spent it on a man who scrubs trucks. His voice was low. I don't walk away from that. I've spent my whole life learning to run toward the person who's bleeding. You called me because you were bleeding where nobody could see, so I ran toward you. That's all this is. That's all it ever is with me. Vivian stood in the dark hallway of her enormous house, and her eyes filled, and this time she didn't blink it back because there were no cameras here, and no board, and no whispering women with phones. Just a man who'd told her the truth in a way no one had told her anything in years. I don't know what to do with that, she whispered. You don't have to do anything with it, Wade said gently. That's the part you keep getting wrong. Some things you don't have to do anything with. You just let them be true. He nodded toward the guest room where his daughter slept and the hall toward where her son slept. Get some sleep, Vivian. We've got a man to take apart in the morning, and you're going to be the one who does it. I'm just going to be standing close in case you start to bleed. Thursday came gray and cold, and at 9 in the morning, Vivian Ashford walked into her own boardroom with a combat medic 2 steps behind her, and Howard Pell was already sitting at the head of the table. Wade clocked it instantly, the chair the head of the table exactly as predicted, and he caught Vivian's eye for a fraction of a second, and she gave him the smallest nod. I see it, you were right, and something in her steadied. Vivian, Pell said. He had a warm voice, a good voice, the voice of a man who'd spent 6 years being the reasonable one. Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult. We're all here because we care about you, and about this company, and... His eyes went to Wade, and a flicker of something crossed his face, because Wade was not in the script. I'm sorry, who is this? This is a closed session. Board members only. This is Mr. Coleman, Vivian said. He's here as my guest, and the bylaws permit the subject of a removal action to have one advisor present. Diane. Article 9, Section 4. Diane said crisply from her seat against the wall. The subject may have one advisor present at any removal proceeding. It's her right. Pell's smile didn't move, but something behind it cooled. Of course, of course. Mr. Coleman, welcome. He turned back to the room, gathering it, reasserting control. Well, let's not drag this out longer than we have to. I think we all know why we're here. There are concerns, serious concerns, about Vivian's capacity to lead, and rather than let them fester, I've asked us to address them directly as a board in the open. I have some material I'd like to... Before you do, Vivian said. The room went still. I'm invoking my right to address the board before any evidence is presented or any vote is taken. Her voice was calm. It was the calmest voice in the room. Article 9, Section 4. The subject speaks first. Diane will confirm. She's correct, Diane said. The subject has the right to address the board before the proceeding moves forward. It's not optional. For just a second, half a second, Vivian saw it happen, saw the thing Wade had told her to watch for. Howard Pell's hand resting on the folder in front of him, the folder with his cut of the footage cued and ready. His fingers tightened on it. The smallest motion. The motion of a man who'd planned to fire first, and had just been told he couldn't. He needs to go first, Wade had said. His whole plan runs on speed. Take the speed away and watch his hand. There was the hand. Of course, Pell said smoothly, leaning back, spreading his palms, the picture of generosity. By all means, Vivian, say your piece. And Vivian Ashford stood up in front of the 11 people who had gathered to remove her with a combat medic, standing quiet against the wall, and she did not reach for the conspiracy paper that would win the fight. She reached for the footage that would prove she was right, "I'd like to show you something first," she said, and crossed to the screen and picked up the remote. "Not Howard's version. I understand he has one prepared. I've seen it." She looked around the table, meeting each face in turn, slow the way Wade had told her. "Don't rush, the rushing is fear. Let them feel you not rushing." "I'd like to show you the original, the full security footage from Belcourt. 40 minutes unedited, authenticated with full chain of custody. Diane has the documentation for anyone who wants to verify it isn't altered. Because the version that's been circulating, the version Howard's about to show you, is 40 seconds long. And I think before you vote on my future, you've earned the right to see the other 39 minutes. She found Patricia Vance's face across the table. Held it. "And then I'm going to ask one of you a question," Vivian said quietly. "Just one. And I'm going to ask you to answer it as a parent, not as a board member, as somebody who stood up too fast in a public place because for 1 second you couldn't find your child." She pressed play. And in the silence of that boardroom on the screen, 60 feet of a restaurant came to life, a woman at a window table, a phone in her hand, and across the room a small boy in a gray blazer sliding down out of his chair to go find someone who'd made him laugh. Howard Pell shifted in the head chair. His hand was still on his folder. And for the first time in 2 days of perfect, patient, reasonable maneuvering, Howard Pell looked very slightly like a man who had brought a cut of a story into a room that was about to watch the whole thing. Against the wall, Wade Coleman stood very still and watched the faces and waited, the way he'd waited his whole life for the moment the bleeding started, so he could be there when it did. The footage played, and for 40 seconds the room was exactly what Howard Pell had wanted it to be. There she was on the screen, Vivian at the window, the phone in her hand, the tension visible in her shoulders. There was the stand, the sudden rise out of the chair. And Vivian watched the faces around the table do precisely what Pell had been counting on them to do. She watched Reyes glance at Pell with a small grim nod. Watched Brennan's mouth tighten. Watched the room begin to settle into the story it had been told for 2 days. There. You see? She came apart, and then the footage kept going. Because Pell's cut ended at the stand at the worst possible frame, the one where her face was caught mid-motion and could be called anything. But the original didn't end there. The original kept rolling, and Vivian let it, didn't narrate, didn't rush, just let the room watch the 2 seconds Howard Pell had been so careful to remove. The scan. Her eyes going not wide, but searching, sweeping low left to right down at floor level. The lock the instant her eyes found the small boy, 60 feet away. And then the shoulders coming down, the whole body unclenching the moment she located her child. Vivian froze the frame there. On her own face, mid-scan, eyes down, searching the floor of a restaurant for a 6-year-old. The room was silent. "That's the part you weren't shown," Vivian said quietly. "Howard's version ends 2 seconds earlier, right here." She stepped the footage back to the stand. "The frame from the cut is where he wanted you to stop looking. And I understand why. Because if you stop looking here, you can call this anything you want. You can call it a breakdown. You can call it instability. You can call it a woman who can't handle pressure." She stepped it forward again to the scan, the searching eyes. "But if you keep looking just 2 more seconds, you see what I was actually doing." She turned from the screen. She found Patricia Vance. "Patricia," she said, "you have 2 children." Vance went still. "I'm not going to tell you what you're looking at," Vivian said. "Howard spent 2 days telling everyone in this room what they're looking at. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to ask you to look at this one frame, my face right here, and tell this room, as a mother, what you see. Not what you've been told. What your own eyes tell you." And then Vivian did the hardest thing of all, the thing Wade had drilled into her at 2 in the morning until she could do it half asleep. She stopped talking, and she let the silence sit. It was the longest silence that boardroom had heard in years. Patricia Vance looked at the frozen frame on the screen, at the searching eyes, the lowered gaze the body caught in the universal posture of a parent who has for 1 terrible second lost sight of their child in a crowd. And something moved across Patricia Vance's face, something that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or fiduciary duty, or the politics of who would hold the chair. "That's not a breakdown," Patricia Vance said slowly. Her voice was unsteady. "I've stood up like that, in a grocery store, when my daughter was 4 and I turned around and she wasn't in the cart." She looked around the table almost wonderingly, as if surprised to find herself speaking. "That's not panic. That's a mother who can't find her kid. That's the most natural thing in the world. I've done it. Every parent in this room has done it." And there it was. Wade against the wall did not move a muscle, but something in his eyes shifted the smallest acknowledgement, the recognition of a thing he'd predicted coming true exactly as he'd said it would. The moment one parent names it, Pell's story is dead. He can't unring it. It was unrung. "Thank you, Patricia," Vivian said softly. "That's all I wanted. For someone to say out loud what their own eyes saw before anyone voted on it." Howard Pell moved then smooth and fast, the way a man moves when he feels the ground shifting and needs to plant his feet before it's gone. This is Vivian. This is theater. Touching theater. But the footage, edited or not, isn't really the point, is it? The point is the broader pattern, the leak, the exposure, the... "Let's talk about the leak," Vivian said, and the temperature in the room changed. She didn't raise her voice. That was the thing Wade had told her over and over at the kitchen island. You never raise your voice. Raising your voice is what people do when they're not sure, and you're going to be sure. So she didn't. She crossed back to her seat and she opened the folder Diane had prepared, the authenticated one, and she laid it on the table with a quietness that was louder than any shout. "Howard, you've spent 2 days telling this board that internal financials leaked, that the company was exposed, that my judgment was the cause." She looked at him. "I'd like to know who leaked them. Wouldn't you? As a man so concerned about the company's exposure, surely the first thing you'd want is to find the source of the breach." "Of course," Pell said. "Of course, and we should investigate, but that's separate from the question of whether—" "I already investigated," Vivian said. "I finished last night." The room went very quiet. "The footage from Belcourt that's been circulating, Howard's 40-second cut, somebody had to pull that. A restaurant's security feed isn't public. Someone with access to it had to obtain it, edit it, and wrote it to this board." She turned a page in the folder. "So I asked a simple question. Who owns Belcourt?" Pell's face had gone carefully, deliberately neutral. Wade, watching from the wall, knew that face. It was the face of a man who'd just realized the trap he built had a second door, and that someone else was standing in it. "Belcourt is owned through a holding company," Vivian said, "which is owned through a private equity group, which is managed—" She looked up and held Howard Pell's eyes across the table where he'd planted himself in her chair. "By Gerald Pell Hartman, your wife's brother." A sound went through the room. Not a gasp. These were not people who gasped, but a shift, a stirring, the sound of 11 careful people recalculating at once. "That proves nothing," Pell said, but his voice had a hairline crack in it now. "My brother-in-law owns a number of restaurants. I have no involvement in his. My dinner reservation that night," Vivian continued as if he hadn't spoken, "was flagged in the restaurant's internal system the moment I made it. There's a notation. It reads," she read it off the page, "VIP notify GPH, Gerald Pell Hartman. Your brother-in-law's restaurant was instructed to notify him the instant I booked a table." She turned another page. "They knew I was coming, Howard, before I walked in the door, which means the cameras weren't catching something by accident. They were waiting." The crack in Pell's composure widened. "Vivian, this is a conspiracy theory. I'm not finished." 2 words. Flat. And they stopped him cold, because there was something in the room now that hadn't been there before, something the whole board could feel, and it was the unmistakable sensation of a hunt that had reversed direction. "There's one more thing," Vivian said, and for the first time her voice carried something underneath the calm, something that wasn't strategy at all. "The man standing against that wall, Mr. Coleman, the reason he and his daughter were at Belcourt that night, The reason there was anyone in that restaurant for me to react to in public at all was a prize. His 7-year-old daughter won her school's science fair. The prize was a dinner donated to the district by a generous anonymous patron 3 weeks ago. She looked down at the folder, and when she looked back up, the thing underneath her voice had risen to the surface, and it was anger-controlled, banked, but real. That donation, she said, came through the same holding company that owns Belcor, the one your brother-in-law runs. 3 weeks before that dinner, they donated a prize to a school Howard. They steered a science fair-winning little girl and her widowed father to a specific restaurant on a specific night, my night, the night they flagged my reservation, because they needed someone in that room for me to react to. They needed a moment they could film, so they manufactured one, and they used a 7-year-old's proudest day to do it. The silence in the room was total now. That little girl's father is a Navy combat medic, Vivian said. He did 3 deployments. He has a drawer full of letters from the families of men he kept alive. He lost his wife while he was overseas saving strangers, and he left the service to raise his daughter alone, and he scrubs trucks at 5 in the morning so he can be home to read her to sleep at night. And you? She looked at Howard Pell and did not blink. You used his child as bait in a trap meant for me. You took the best day of a motherless little girl's life and you turned it into a weapon. That's not a leak, Howard. A leak is an accident. This was a plan. And you didn't just breach your duty to this company. You manufactured a conspiracy against its chair using forged urgency and a falsified narrative. And you did it on the backs of a 7-year-old and her father, who never did a single thing to you except exist where you could use them. She closed the folder. Every transfer is in here, she said quietly. Every shell company. Every date. The reservation flag time-stamped. The donation traced from your brother-in-law's holding company to a 2nd-grade science fair. The authenticated original footage with chain of custody that proves the version you brought to this room was deliberately cut to deceive 11 people you owe a fiduciary duty to. She slid the folder to the center of the table. I came in here today expecting to defend myself. I'm not the one who needs defending anymore. It was Daniel Okafor who broke the silence. He'd been quiet the whole time the man Wade had said they couldn't aim at the one who decided by some private standard nobody could see. He'd watched the footage. He'd watched Patricia Vance name what she saw. He'd watched the folder slide to the center of the table. And now he leaned forward and he spoke in a slow, deliberate voice, and the room turned to him because everyone knew that Daniel Okafor did not waste words. I joined this board 4 years ago, Okafor said, because I believed in how this company was run. Howard, you came to me Monday. You told me Vivian was unstable. You told me she'd come apart in public, that there was footage, that we had to act fast before things got worse. He paused. You told me there wasn't time to look closely. That stuck with me, actually. I kept thinking about it. There isn't time to look closely. He looked down the table at Pell. I've been on a lot of boards. And in my experience, the only person who ever tells you there isn't time to look closely is the person who's afraid of what you'll see if you do. Against the wall, Wade Coleman closed his eyes for half a second. Because that was it. That was the exact thing he'd said at the kitchen island, almost word for word. Every bad operation runs on speed and fear. Because the second anybody slows down and looks, it falls apart. And Daniel Okafor, the man they couldn't read, had arrived at it entirely on his own, by his own private standard, exactly as Wade had said a man like that would. I looked closely, Okafor said. Just now, we all did. And I don't like what I saw. He turned to the room. I move that we table the removal action against Vivian Ashford, permanently. And I move that this board open an immediate investigation into Howard Pell's conduct with outside counsel beginning today. Seconded, said Patricia Vance before anyone else could speak, and Howard Pell, who had walked into that room with 7 votes lined up and a 40-second cut of a story cued and ready, who had planned every move except the one where someone slowed down and looked. Howard Pell sat at the head of a table that was no longer his and watched the room he'd spent 2 days assembling come apart in his hands, exactly the way Wade Coleman had told Vivian it would, because a man who builds his whole attack out of a lie wrapped around a truth cannot grab it back once someone unwraps it in front of everyone. The vote wasn't close. It wasn't close at all. Even the four oldest members, Reyes, Ton, Brennan, Holloway, the ones Wade had said not to waste a word on, even they could read a room that had turned, and not one of them wanted to be recorded standing beside a man under investigation for conspiracy. The removal action died, the investigation passed, and Howard Pell, who had come to take everything left with a forensic accountant's folder, pointed at his chest and his brother-in-law's name in the official minutes. He stopped at the door on his way out. He looked back at Vivian. And for a moment, something almost human crossed his face, something that might have been the question he'd never thought to ask. "How did you see it?" he said. "The cut, the 2 seconds. Nobody saw it. My own people didn't see it." Vivian didn't answer. She didn't have to, because it wasn't her question to answer. It was Wade who answered from his place against the wall in a voice as level and quiet as it had been all morning. "Because you were looking at a CEO," Wade said, "and I was looking at a mother. You can't trap what you don't understand, Mr. Pell. And you never understood a single thing about what you were aiming at." Howard Pell looked at the man in the second-hand jacket for a long moment. Then he left, and the door closed behind him, and it was over. The room emptied slowly. Board members came to Vivian Patricia Vance first, gripping her hand, her eyes wet, saying, "I'm sorry. I should have looked sooner." Then Okafor, who said only good work and meant it. Then others, the apology and the recalculation written all over them. Vivian received them the way she received everything, with composure. But Wade, watching from the wall, where he'd stood the whole time without saying more than 2 sentences, saw that her hands were trembling very slightly, the way they had under the tablecloth at Belcour 3 weeks ago. When the last of them had gone, when it was only the two of them and Diane quietly gathering the authenticated files, Vivian crossed the room to where Wade stood. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "You didn't say much," she said finally. "Didn't need to," Wade said. "Wasn't my room. Wasn't my fight to win. It was yours." He almost smiled. "I just stood close like I said I would, in case you started to bleed. I almost did. When I looked at Patricia and asked the question and she didn't answer right away, that silence, I almost filled it. I almost panicked and filled it. But you didn't. No, I heard you. Let the silence sit. Let her name it." Vivian looked up at him. Her composure was finally in the empty room beginning to come apart at the edges, not into weakness, but into something raw and more true. "You did that. Everything in there, the footage, the order leading with the mother, and not the paper, the silence, that was you. That was all you, Wade. I'd have walked in there and won an ugly fight with documents and kept my chair by being the most dangerous person in the building, exactly like you said. And instead," her voice caught, "instead, Patricia Vance held my hand and apologized with tears in her eyes. And Daniel Okafor said good work, and I kept my chair because they believe in me again. You gave me that. A man who scrubs trucks gave me the thing my $250,000 lawyers couldn't." "You gave it to yourself," Wade said. "I just told you where to stand. You're the one who stood there." He looked at her steadily. "And you're the one who did the hardest part, which wasn't anything I taught you. You walked into a room to defend yourself, and you spent half your time defending me. You told 11 powerful people about my Lily, about Sarah, about the trucks. You stood up in front of the people who were trying to destroy you, and you used your own defense to make sure they knew exactly what they'd done to a little girl who isn't even yours." His jaw worked just once. "Nobody taught you that, Vivian. That came from somewhere I didn't put it. That was yours." They picked the kids up from the house together. Sam and Lily had spent the morning with the housekeeper, who reported with something close to bewilderment that she had never in 11 years of working in that house heard so much noise, and that the blanket kingdom now occupied 2 full rooms and showed no signs of stopping its expansion. "Mom?" Sam hit her at a run the way he'd learned to run for someone he loved. "Lily made me prime minister. There's a prime minister now. It's a whole government, and Biscuit's the Secretary of Defense, even though he's not here. Biscuits not even your dog, Vivian said, scooping him up, and her son laughed, and she held him a beat longer than she normally would have, a beat longer than the old Vivian ever had. And over his shoulder, she met Wade's eyes, and Wade was watching her hold her son. And there was something in his face. She didn't have a word for either, but it was warm, and it was glad, and it was the opposite of every cold thing the morning had held. That night, because Wade and Lily stayed again, because nobody suggested otherwise, because it had simply become the thing that happened. Now Wade read 4 pages of The Hobbit to 2 children instead of 1 in the enormous guest room with Sam on one side and Lily on the other, both of them fighting sleep and losing. And Vivian stood in the doorway and watched, and when Lily finally snored at the dragon exactly as advertised, Sam whispered, fierce and delighted, "She really does snore." And Wade whispered back, "Told you, like a little chainsaw." And Sam laughed so hard he had to put his hand over his mouth, and then he too went down into sleep mid-laugh, the way only safe children do. Wade closed the book. He sat for a moment between the 2 sleeping kids. Then he eased up, careful not to wake them, and came to the doorway where Vivian stood. "He laughed himself to sleep," Vivian said softly. "I didn't know children did that. I didn't know that was a thing that happened." "It's the most common thing in the world," Wade said, "for kids who feel safe." They stood in the hallway, the same dim hallway where 2 nights ago he'd told her some things you don't have to do anything with, you just let them be true. And Vivian thought about that, and about everything that had happened since, and she made a decision the way she'd learned to make them recently, not with strategy, but plainly the terrible way, the way that counts. "Stay," she said. "Not tonight. I mean stay. You and Lily. There's room. There's so much room. Wade, this house has 11 bedrooms, and 2 people have ever been happy in it, and both of them are asleep in there right now." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "I'm not buying you. I want to be clear about that because I know that's the thing you watch for, and you'd be right to watch for it. I'm not offering you money or a job or security. I'm asking you to come be part of whatever this is. This thing where Sam runs to the door. This thing where children laugh themselves to sleep. I don't have a word for it. I've never had one." She swallowed. "I built a billion-dollar company because I thought that's what I was supposed to give my son. And it turns out the only thing he ever needed was a person who'd stay. I can't be the medic. I can't be the one who reads 4 pages. But I can stop being the woman who's always on a plane. And I'd like to do it here. With you, if you'd let us." Wade was quiet for a long time. "I told you once," he said finally. "The Empire's not the thing. You remember." "I remember. I meant it. And I'll come, Vivian. Me and Lily will come, but not for the 11 bedrooms, and not for the help, and not for 1 cent of what you've got. We'll come for the dinners, for the 4 pages, for 2 kids who run to the door." He looked at her steadily, the way he'd looked at her across a restaurant table 3 weeks ago before either of them knew anything. "On one condition, the same one I'd have given you the first night if you'd asked. Those 2 kids in there come first, before the company, before the chair, before anything. Sam and Lily come first always, no matter what board's on fire or what quarter looks soft. That's the deal. That's the only deal I've got. That's the only deal I want," Vivian said. And Wade Coleman, the combat medic who'd spent his whole life running toward the people who were bleeding, who'd lost the one person his gift couldn't save and quit an empire to keep the dinners, who'd been used as bait and turned himself into the trap. Wade Coleman reached out and took the hand of the most powerful woman in the city, the same way he'd taken the scrap of receipt 3 weeks before, careful like it was something he'd been trusted with. And he didn't let go. They were married 11 months later in the backyard where the Blanket Kingdom had once stood, and a real fort now stood in its place, built board by board over a summer, by a man who knew how to use his hands, and 2 children who mostly handed him the wrong nails. There was no magazine cover. There was no press. Vivian Ashford, who had spent 20 years arranging her life for how it would look, arranged the most important day of it for how it would feel, and the only photographs taken were on a phone by Diane, who cried through most of them and ruined half. Sam was the ring bearer. Lily was the flower girl, and she gave a speech nobody had authorized about how dogs can smell time, and how she'd figured out that the reason dogs always know when their person is coming home is the same reason she'd known the very first night in the restaurant that Sam was going to be her brother, because some things you can smell coming before you can see them if you're paying attention. Nobody understood it entirely. Everybody cried anyway. Vivian kept the company. She ran it differently. She was home for dinner more nights than not, and on the nights she couldn't be, Wade was, and on the rare nights neither of them could be. There was the other one's voice on the phone reading 4 pages because they'd worked it out between them that the 4 pages were not negotiable, that the 4 pages were in fact the entire point of everything else. Howard Pell was gone within the month. The investigation found everything Vivian's folder had promised, and more, and the board that had nearly removed her removed him, instead, unanimously, with Patricia Vance and Daniel Okafor leading the motion. His brother-in-law's holding company was named in 3 separate filings. Belcourt closed within the year. Nobody mourned it, and Wade kept one job in the end, not because he had to, but because Vivian understood finally that a man who'd spent his life running toward the bleeding could not simply stop and shouldn't. He went back to medicine. He trained paramedics, taught the young ones the difference between panic and search between a body that's frozen and a body that's looking the difference that had once saved an empire and would now in his hands save people he'd never meet. He came home every night. He read 4 pages every night. And some nights after the children were asleep, he'd sit on the back porch. They'd finally built the porch he and Sarah had once dreamed of, the one with the chairs, where you grow old, yelling about the thermostat, and Vivian would come sit beside him, and they wouldn't say much because they didn't have to. 2 children laughed themselves to sleep in that house every night, raised at last, not by systems, not by staff, not by schedules or security, or the cold machinery of money, but by 2 people who'd come from opposite ends of the world and learned the same thing the hard way. The only thing either of them had ever needed to learn. That the most powerful thing on earth is not money, and it is not status, and it is not the empire you build or the chair you keep. It is a person who stays. And in that house and that family rebuilt from 2 broken halves, nobody ever left again.